What is the Jewish claim to the land of Israel? The Arabs make their claim that they have been there all along. Is that a valid claim if they conquered the land, as the way of the world is that one conquers the land and therefore becomes theirs? Very interesting discussion with the Prime Minister of Israel and Jordan Peterson. I must tell you, I take great issue in what the Prime Minister is about to share. I'd like to play this for you now. I'll give my thoughts on it. I'd like to hear your thoughts likewise.
You said the Arabs came in the 7th century, and that's a long time ago. And so from the 7th century to now, you might think of that as being a time frame long enough to allow for a valid claim of sovereignty ownership. But the Jews' rejoinder is, well, we have a much older claim than that, one that spans 3,500 years. And the problem I have with that conceptually, and then I'll get to some other issues that are relevant to this, is that it's not exactly obvious what time frame of analysis should be primary.
You have a very important
and I don't really
point.
know how to solve that.
I do,
Yeah,
and I'll answer your question. It's a valid
Okay.
question. If the Arabs, having conquered the land in the 7th century and dispossessed the Jews over the next 2 centuries, the Jewish farmers kicked them out and so on, if they established a viable state, a viable national identity there and so on, you're right. These things happen in history. You're supplanted by another people, fine. But that's not what happened. The Arab conquerors themselves were replaced by other. First of all, they did nothing with the land. It's just barren. They actually built one town. It's called Ramle. That's it. Hundreds and hundreds of Jewish biblical sites and hundreds and thousands of new sites that we built. The Arabs built one place, one town called Ramle. That's it. So they did nothing with the land. Then they were replaced by other conquerors. Other conquerors came in. The Mamluks, the Ottomans, ultimately the British, a series of conquerors. In other words, they took over the land, lost the land, and did nothing with the land. So if they had done what you say, if they had created, if that house that we were expelled from was taken over by another people, another family, they built a family there, they had children, grandchildren, they extended the porch, they built a parking garage and so on, it's gone. What can you do? You still have the ability to demand reclamations, compensation and so on. But,
What do you mean that it's gone? It's true that that's the way of the world, as conquer or be conquered. That's the way of the kings, that's the way of the nations of the world. That's true. But even when we were disposed of the land, or we were conquered in the year 69 by the Romans, destroying the second holy temple and taking tens of thousands of Jews as slaves to Rome, we still prayed 3 times a day facing Jerusalem that we are going to return to Jerusalem and to the land of Israel. So there's something unique about the Jewish claim. It's not like all other claims that is, white man came to America and disposed the natives of their land. And, okay, we feel a little guilty. So we now want to give back to the natives of the land things, and we give them special dispensations and so on and so forth. That's not the way of the land of Israel, because the land of Israel is called the Holy Land. What makes it holy? Not because I decided or the Jewish people decided, it's because God gave it to the Jewish people. He gave it to Abraham, he gave it to Isaac, he gave it to Jacob, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to their descendants. And even when they're not on the land, even when we've been exiled from the land, it still is our land, not in our possession, but it is still our homeland. It is our holy land, and that never can change. That's unique about the land of Israel. And if we don't If we have a trouble with that, I suggest that this is the trouble that's going on in the Middle East because we don't have the real authority. Everybody's going to argue about history. And that's what the argument right now is that the prime minister is presenting. Although I believe what he's saying is the truth, but it's not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is it's the land that the Bible says that is accepted by Christians and Muslims that God gave to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which I and other Jews are descendants of. So it belongs to us, rightfully so. Even when we're not on the land, we pray in that direction 3 times a day. Our prayers are full of mentioning of returning to the land, specifically returning to the land with the presence of God and the third holy temple. But absolutely. Let's hear some more.
Tough luck. That happens in history. But that's not what happened. Once the Jews were conquered by the Arabs did nothing with it, lost the land to others. Now we come back and bring it back to life 13 centuries later and perform this miracle, and they fabricate a history where we were there all the time. It was a verdant homeland. It was built up. It was nothing of the kind. It was desert. It was nothing. Now, it's not merely Mark Twain and Arthur Penryn Stanley who say that. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of travelogues over the centuries of famous French poets, of Swiss travelers, of German theologians, everybody, of poets, writers, travelers who describe exactly the same thing. There was nothing there. There was no Palestinian state. There were no Palestinians. They didn't even, the Arabs even didn't call themselves that. They were calling themselves parts of southern Syria, whatever. There was no national consciousness. There was nothing to form the consciousness about. In the 20th century, the Arab world and the Palestinians and their supporters in the West, among the intellectual elites, basically erased history and recreated a fake history that deracinates the Jewish roots that are unparalleled. There is no other story in the history of nations where people fought for so long for their land, for 2,000 years, were dispossessed from it, came back to it, did not kick out an existing population with a national consciousness, rebuilt the land, and now are being told you have no connections to it. You were, you're the colonials. No, we're not. We're not just to give this, just to give us a fine point, because this is so crucial what we're discussing. And I discuss it at considerable length in my book because people are so ignorant of history. We are not the Belgians in the Congo. We're not the Dutch in Indonesia, okay? We're not the British in South Africa. We had been there all the time. We had.
Very true. We had been there all the time, even when we were exiled. And a majority of Jews lived in Babylon, Iraq, Iran, modern day, which we're talking about, 1,500 years ago, and 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. We still had many Jews that lived in Israel. And again, most importantly, it never ceased to be our homeland, the aspiration. As Jews pray 3 times a day, not just facing Jerusalem, but mentioning several times in the prayers about Jerusalem. That's crucial to appreciate. That's unique. What other people have been exiled from their homeland, face their homeland in their prayers, mention them in their prayers, and return there. So we've had the exile from Israel by the Babylonians in the 6th century before the Common Era, The first Holy Temple was destroyed after it stood for 410 years. Then 70 years later, we came back. And 420 years later, it was destroyed in the year 69 by the Romans. So we've been there and we continue to be there. And there's no question. But the basis and the root is not the historical claim, because there you can say, well, you're right, the British conquered it, and now they gave it to us, or they made a two-state solution. Yeah, but then you can argue, who gave them the right that they could do that? They took it away from the Ottoman Empire, who are, you know, and the Ottomans, they took it away from. So, you know, that becomes a slippery slope, even though that itself also, I think, is pretty clear that if it's conquered, ways of the world, that's the way it is. But, you know, there can be some kind of argument there. But there is no argument that everybody agrees that in the Bible, what it says. And for those who believe in the Bible, which are Christians and Muslims, this is what it says very clearly. Let's hear some more.
Been in the Congo. We had been, if you will, the equivalent in Indonesia. We were kicked out of the Congo and nothing happened in the Congo. Nothing. No other people there, no development, nothing. Okay? Now we come back to our land, build it up, enable immigration from of Arabs, who are now called Palestinians, from neighboring lands, and they tell us, oh, you don't belong here, you dispossessed us. This is essentially what Arab propaganda and Palestinian propaganda has done. This whole attack on the Jewish people's right to live in the Jewish homeland, the attempt to erase the Bible and to erase the history after the Bible, and to create a modern fantasy that doesn't exist, based on the Palestinians who want to destroy us, who support terrorism, who are anti-democratic, who are or basically neo-colonials, because they're really the colonials. That is something that I think has. It's not merely folly. It has something fundamentally wrong morally, because it is both untrue and unjust.
Okay, so the claim, so
I want to strengthen what the Prime Minister is saying there. It's so true. This is not, different ways to look at history. This is clearly the Muslim agenda by those who are fanatics, which is not a small portion, but those who are fanatics, of making the world a Muslim conquered world. So it's easier to start with Israel because you've been there. And at one point, you were even more than the Jews were there in numbers, which is true. It's easier to start with there than it is with England or with France or with Germany. Well, because you really don't have a claim there. But what are they trying to do in those countries? The extreme Muslim believers, they're trying to take it over. In France, there's a lot of force and violence. In other places, maybe not as much. Maybe they're trying more politically, right? When they will be a strong majority in perhaps 20 years, and then they'll be able to take over. I mean, some levels are taking over now because they have strong vote in those democratic countries. That's what they're trying to do. But where's it easier? In Israel. So that's a good place to start. But they're not finishing in Israel. Let's continue.
so far, if I'm going to say lean in the direction of your argument without leaning too far and too obviously, I would say is something like this, and tell me if I've got it right. There's a host of competing claims to the territory that now constitutes Israel. And you could have some debate about, perhaps technically, about which of those claims should reign supreme. The additional case that you make, however, is that the Israelis, the Jews, have done a tremendous amount of work in improving this territory. And I know there's a principle of ownership in Western common law, in English common law, and I'm not a lawyer, so I may muck this up to some degree, but I understand the principle. If you own territory, a vast swath of land, and you're doing nothing to it, and someone comes and squats on it and spends a lot of time improving it, at some point they actually develop a valid legal claim to the property itself. And so there seems to be something intrinsic to our notion of valid ownership, that if you're going to occupy a territory, you actually have to do something with it that's productive. And so that's at least part of the claim you're making at the moment, to buttress the notion that the Jewish people have a valid claim to the present territory.
Well, and
there were a lot of movement back and forth,
yes,
but the Jews have actually taken the land and made something of it.
Well, I'm saying something else, though. I'm saying that they held the land for 2,000 years, were kicked out. The Arabs came and conquered it and immediately lost it to others and did nothing with it. The others did nothing with it. So it was basically, they took over my apartment, okay, a long time ago. The guys who took over, who basically kicked me out, were kicked out themselves. The apartment was left barren, and many decades, in this case centuries later, I come back to this barren mess, okay, this ruin, and I build it up back, and I not only improve it, I not only make my ownership based on improvement, but that nobody else did anything with it. There was no someone else. There practically were no tenants.
Right.
There. That's my argument.
Right. You're also making the case that when the Jews came to Israel, they were doing what they could to coexist with the people who were there, with a sparse number of people who were there, but also to set up a state that would invite other people who weren't Jewish to live there as well. So it wasn't an oppressive regime in any sense.
Well, we know what happened.
Sense of the word.
We know what happened. We know that when 75 years ago, when the state of Israel was declared, you didn't have a single Arab refugee. I mean, the Arabs say now that their enmity to Israel and the reason they went to war with Israel was because of the Arab refugee. But there wasn't a single Arab refugee or Palestinian refugee when Israel was established. In fact, the refugees are the result of Arab aggression and not its cause. And in fact, the Arab onslaught, 5 Arab armies that attacked the tiny Jewish state in its inception, these 5 Arab armies created 2 refugee problems. One, the Palestinian refugees who fled before the advancing armies, being promised that they could come back in a few days because the Jews would be annihilated, driven to the sea. That didn't work out, thank God. But in those 5 Arab states, there lived many Jews. Those Jews were summarily kicked out after our war of independence. So the Arab onslaught on Israel, on Israel's inception, produced 2 refugee problems. One, Palestinian refugees, Arab refugees, we call them Palestinians. And the second is Jewish refugees. Now, Israel, with less than 1% of the total landmass of the Arab states, takes in the same number of refugees, Jewish refugees, as you had Palestinian refugees. You don't see them here. They're integrated into our society, into our government, into business, into everything. We solved, without the cornucopia of Arab oil, we solved our refugee problem caused by the Arab onslaught on Israel. The Palestinian refugee problem is kept alive by the Arabs that have 100 times more land, infinite oil resources. They keep it alive as a battering ram to produce exactly the propaganda that you say. So basically what the technique of Arab propaganda has been, and I describe it to some extent in my in my biography too, because you have to understand it. You have to see it to believe it, is to turn the results of Arab aggression against Israel into its cause. They first did that with the refugees when Israel was established. They then didn't accept Israel's right to exist, even though we're a tiny country. They tried to attack us again 19 years later and destroy us. That's called the 6-Day Wars. In 6 days, we pushed back the Arab countries and took over our ancestral lands of Judea, Samaria. And again, what the Arabs did is exactly the same thing. They said that our occupation, our so-called occupation of the heartland of the Jewish people, Judea and Samaria, that produced the war. No, that didn't produce the war. It was the result of their attempt, their second attempt, to annihilate us. So this technique of reversing causality, that is, accusing Israel, basically turning the results of Arab aggression into its cause, is again one of these ways of creating the delegitimization of Israel. The reason we have not had peace with the Palestinians is not because of the Arab refugees. There weren't any when they attacked us. The reason is not the territories. We didn't control these territories. They were in Arab hands before the Six-Day War. All of these things are a result of the Arab aggression. And what is the cause of the Arab?
So beautiful what he is saying, and so true. There was a two-state solution in 1947 by the UN when the British left. There would be a part that would be for the Jewish people, Israel, and then that was Transjordan, which is today Jordan. That would be the Palestinian state, or another Arab state. Israel would get back what we have been praying. Well, it's not exactly what we're praying for. We're praying for God's presence in the land, even though there's great miracles and God's presence is very palpable in the land of Israel today. No question about that. But we're even more so, times of the third and final holy temple, where there'll be true peace on earth and beyond that. But yeah, if they would have accepted it, that the Jewish people have a place here, there wouldn't be any problems. There wouldn't be anybody without a home, because whoever wants a home in the land of Israel, be a Jew, Christian, or an Arab, is free to have their home, to work for it, and to buy it. And if you had it already in 47, there's no problem in keeping your home. But Arab aggression created the problem. We took in our fellow Jews, but the Arabs don't want to take in their fellow Arabs. That tells you something more, that it's nothing to do about a piece of land. It's got to do with a political agenda. Got to use them always as, the battering ram against Israel. Let's hear some more of the cause, what's behind all of this.
Arab aggression. It's the persistent Arab refusal to accept a Jewish state in any boundary in our ancestral homeland. And if you remove that, you get peace. Now, how do we know that we get peace? Because this persistent Arab refusal has dissipated. It's dissipated over time. As the strength of Israel, as I describe in my book, as Israel becomes not merely a fact, but a permanent fact in the Middle East, so they know they can't get rid of it. So Arab countries begin to make peace with us. And I had the privilege, which I describe again in my book, of forging 4 Arab peace agreements, 4 peace agreements with Arab states, because that barrier, that obstacle of refusing to accept a Jewish state at any boundary has disappeared. Where does it persist? In the Palestinians, who are 1% to 2% of the entire Arab world, wagging it's the tail wagging the dog. Or they tried until recently. They were quite successful in wagging the dog. Palestinians, cling on to the fantasy of eliminating Israel, denying us our historical and present rights to live anywhere in this land, refusing to any kind of practical compromise, refusing to accept the declaration of Israel in the UN, the partition resolution. We did, they refused, refusing any kind of realistic negotiation for peace. What has happened, and here's what happened, Jordan. For the last quarter of a century, after the initial peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, for 25 years we had no peace treaties with any Arab country, because the elites, the foreign policy elites and the experts and the intellectuals explained, you cannot make peace with the rest of the Arab world unless you make peace first with the Palestinians. There's a problem there.
Right.
Well, you can't, because the Palestinians are not interested in peace with Israel. They're interested in the peace without Israel. They're not interested in a state next to Israel. They're interested in a state instead of Israel. So if you wait for the Palestinians, you'll wait another quarter of a century, another half century, another century. You're not going to get anywhere. I had to break that logjam, and I describe how I did that in my book. I had to go around the Palestinians, go to the United Arab Emirates, go Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and make peace with them. Why did they change their attitude towards Israel? They changed it because of the result, the growth of Israeli power. As Israel became more powerful technologically, we made a free market revolution that released the genius in our people. Israel became the innovation nation. You can't do that if you're paying 75% marginal tax rate, right? So we cut tax rates, put in basically a capitalist economy, and Israel exploded. But it also became very powerful militarily because we could now afford to fund it. The combination of economic power through free markets and military and intelligence power that combined to give us diplomatic power. And with that, Arab leaders in the area began to see Israel not as their enemy, but as their indispensable ally against a force that was threatening both Israel and them, and that's Iran, Iran's aggression.
I got a comment on this. Very true. Israel needs to be powerful because people respect power. But they use their power to help other nations because they do care. They want to be there, a light onto other nations to help them, whether it's to learn how to desalinate water so you can have drinking water, whether it's to take water from the air and water from the thin air and make it into water in places where there's challenges with clean, healthy water, like in Africa, for example, whatever it might be. They want to be a nation that is there for others. So they're strengthening themselves in an amazing way, and people recognize their goodness and their power, and that's being shared and changing the way people live in other places. And if you care about upgrading your people, then Israel is a place that you need to stop and to find out what they're up to, because there's a lot of great innovation that can help your people and help your nation. Let's continue.
And secondly, they saw the innovation nation that is Israel as a fount of tremendous technology that could better the lives of their people. And therefore, we made these historic peace agreements in record time because now we were no longer bound by the Palestinian straitjacket that you're familiar with in Toronto and in New Zealand and so on. The Arab world is not there. Some of it is, but a lot of it is changing. And my idea is, how do you solve the Palestinian problem? Anytime they want to truly sit down and negotiate, be my guest. I'll be happy to do that. And I've tried that in the past. But in reality, I took a different track. Instead of saying, first we'll solve the problem with the Palestinians, then we'll solve the problem with the Arab world, I actually reversed it. I said, let's go to the Arab world and let's get peace with the Arab world and then circle back to the Palestinians. If they're ready to come before, fine. But if not, let's get peace with 99% and then try to make peace with the 1%, as opposed to let's try the implacable 1% and wait until we get to the other 99%. That's a complete reversal of concept. It's still being challenged. You'll see some of the old guard still saying, no, we have to, we have to go to the Palestinians before we go to the Arab world, and we'll never get peace.
Very true. When you come from a position of power, people listen to it, and especially when there's a goodness with that power. It's not, fascist power of Hitler or Stalin. It's power that wants to do good for the world. Of course, for Israel and the people living in Israel, first and foremost, obviously, but for others. I just want to conclude. This is a siddur, a prayer book. And in this prayer book, the epitome of the high point and the highlight of prayer is called the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei, where we stand before God as a child before God, asking of God And we ask for healing, we ask for livelihood, but we ask so often about the land of Israel. Return in mercy to Jerusalem, your city, and dwell therein as you have promised. Speedily establish therein the throne of David, your servant, as Messiah, Mashiach, comes from the throne of King David, and rebuild it. Even though we have Jerusalem today, when we talk about rebuilding, we're talking about the Holy Temple with the presence of God there. In our days, an everlasting edifice. Blessed are you, Lord, who rebuilds Jerusalem. Wow. Speedily cause the Son of David, your servant, to flourish. We speak about. And then we say in a prayer, restore your service to your sanctuary, right? The place where God's presence in the holy sanctuary. May our eyes behold your return. So it's not just about our physical return, it's about our spiritual return. Even though we have the land today, so we have a physical return, but it's about the spiritual return of the presence of God and the purpose of the Jewish people, which is the purpose of the Jewish people is in the service of God to change the world for good, to be teachers of God's teachings of the Torah to the world that will empower people, that we have mastery, not over others, but over ourselves. And with that, I invite you to join me daily, every day, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Mondays through Fridays, and Sundays at 10:30, to study the Tanya, which is a mystical teachings of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad rabbi. Over 200 years ago, it was written. There are more people studying it today than ever before, which is a testament to how authoritative it is, how essential, and how eternal the teachings are. And it's about me having mastery, not how I can master other people and have them, serve me better, but how I can have mastery over my actions, over my speech, and over my willful and cogitated thoughts. Self-mastery, how the mind has dominion over the heart, how we can not act like an animal and just live by instinct, but we can live by a higher divine value, principles, and teachings, and be aligned with the divine, fulfilling our God-given purpose. So come and join me. I promise you it's going to be a wonderful journey that's very empowering and actually really enjoyable with many other people. You'll journey, and the journey will be wonderful.